Welcome, everyone. I'm going to give it just another moment or two. We've had quite a few folks that signed up for the session today, so I want to give plenty of time to let those folks join. The other thing is, just from a logistics perspective, we will be recording this call and we'll make it available to everyone here who joined, as well as for folks that signed up but were not able to join. So Sharon, if you would go ahead and start the recording.
It is recording.
Okay, great. And the other thing I think I'd like to do, Sharon, if we could, so again, for the audience here, for all of the participants, we're going to mute everyone's line to eliminate background noise as much as possible. But we will take questions throughout the presentation, and then I have a spot at the end where we'll take additional questions as well. So if you do have questions, I've asked Sharon to keep track of the chat and just put your question into the chat window. And as we go through this, I'll try to answer those questions in real time if it's pertinent to the slide that we're talking about. And then for anything that I don't get to, we will cover in the Q&A at the conclusion of the session today. All right, well, with that, I believe I'm going to go ahead and get started. I've got a few things, or I've got a fair amount of content to cover, so I'm going to go ahead and just jump into it here. I guess first, can I get a confirmation that you can see the slides? I always like to make sure that that the team can see the slides.
Yes.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that confirmation. All right. So the topic for today is optimizing utilization for profitability. And this is essentially the, you could call it the first or the second. I guess it's going to be a series of webinars that we'll be hosting here at nCloud for helping overall profitability for professional services organizations. And the reason that I'm sort of debating on whether it's session 1 or session 2, and I'll talk about it in a moment, is this is basically sort of the next level of detail from a presentation that I did, that I co-delivered with Shri from Rocket Lane, the CEO of Rocket Lane, back in July. So this will be there will be a series of webinars going forward that we'll host probably once a month is going to be the cadence. And I'm going to zero in on different aspects of ways to make your services practice more profitable with each one of these webinars. So hopefully today's content, you'll get some good value out of it, and then you'll consider coming back for some of the other webinars that I'll be hosting here as we move forward. The agenda for today, the topics that I'm going to cover, we'll just do a little bit of an introduction for those of you that don't know who I am or don't know a lot about nCloud. We'll just do a little bit of an introduction. I'll talk just a little bit about a topic that I can't speak enough about, and that is the professional services charter. I know that's not the core topic for the presentation, but I do want to highlight this again because I do see this as an area that a lot of organizations that we work with struggle with. And then I'll just talk about some utilization fundamentals. And again, I do understand that there are probably varying levels of services leadership experience attending the call or that will be listening to the call. So I'm going to start with just some core things to think about, some utilization fundamentals that you should be considering if you are at the early stage of this process of developing and tracking your utilization and the fundamentals around that. And then I'll get into a little bit more detail about some intermediate level tracking and how you can use that tracking to improve the efficiency and then ultimately improve the profitability of your services resources. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about some advanced capabilities, again, for those of you that may be on the other end of the pendulum, on the other end of the extreme, and have a PSA, professional services automation tool in place, and you've got all kinds of metrics and tracking that you've already got working. There's some things that we're doing here at nCloud, and I think, and we're helping other customers do as well, that I think will help you with getting a more advanced look at what you can do with your metrics and how you can improve your overall delivery and utilization. So. And then, as I said, we'll wrap up with a little bit of Q&A and close out from there. So, just a little bit about me. Again, I'm Brian Hodges. I'm based here in Columbus, Ohio. I co-founded nCloud Integrators back in 2018, but prior to co-founding nCloud Integrators, I worked at a software company called Informatica Corporation. I was there for 20 years. We were known as the data integration company. They're actually, Informatica is still out there today. I was part of the founders circle, joined in 97. We went, when I started, we had 50 people in the company. We grew the organization over my 20-year tenure. We grew our organization, the company itself. Went public in 99. We did a number of acquisitions through the early 2000s, through the 2012, 13. And I grew my professional services organization to over 450 people at our peak. We had about 125 million in services revenue at our peak. And I experienced, I think, just about every kind of challenge, opportunity that you could imagine in running, growing, and building a professional services organization in that tenure. So I've taken a lot of the lessons learned, a lot of the things that we went through at Informatica, and have applied those to the work that I do here at nCloud and the work that we do with our customers on the professional services front. So, on the, a little bit more about nCloud Integrators. As I'd mentioned before, I worked for 20 years at Informatica running services, and then the global professional services. My co-founder, Chris Darius, was there with me as well, and he ran the Americas. So between the two of us, we've got quite a lot of experience in helping grow and manage services organizations. We do work with customers, and we focus on delivering outcomes, improving your overall services profitability, your services efficiency. We operate on a theory of trust. We work closely with our customers to make sure that they are comfortable with the work that we're doing, that they know at all times, and we do this through a partnership and a commitment to your success. And obviously, I mentioned a moment ago that I delivered or co-delivered a presentation with Shri a couple of weeks ago, or back in July, from Rocket Lane, and we do have a partnership with Rocket Lane. We do use Rocket Lane, although I have experience with a lot of different PSA, professional services automation tools. I've used NetSuite, NetSuite OpenAir. I've used Certinia, used their product as well. So I've had a lot of experience with using different PSA tools, and so I'm not necessarily going to spend time today diving into a whole lot of comparisons or details between the different tools that you can use. And some of you may not have a a tool that you're using today. You may be leveraging spreadsheets, or some other way of tracking your services time. But I won't. I will share a little bit of the way we're using Rocket Lane, but that's demonstrate sort of the phase and task level tracking that we do, and some of the things that we've leveraged the detailed tracking to help us improve the efficiencies of our practice. As I mentioned before, this is a slide from the presentation that we gave back in July. I have put a link down at the bottom for those of you that weren't able to attend that session. I think there's a lot of good content in this session. So if you haven't had an opportunity to view this presentation, it is recorded and you can access it through that link there below. But so this sort of sets the stage for the webinar series that we're putting together here. During this presentation, talking about the systematic approach to moving to PS profitability, I had a lot of questions. We had a lot of questions about every one of we covered probably 7 or 8 key areas to think about when you're looking at how to make your professional services practice more profitable. And throughout that presentation, we had quite a number of questions, and it really, and then I had a number of folks that followed up with me afterwards, and so it really sort of led to the need, or confirmed the need for a more granular level of detail and depth discussion around some of these key components. So as I said, this is the first of a series of webinars that I'll be hosting here at nCloud. I do anticipate, by the way, I do anticipate inviting guest speakers. I don't have one here today, but I do have commitment from a number of my friends in the industry, including some folks from the TSIA, as well as some folks from some very large technology companies that we will invite to join these webinars and have them share some of the details with regard to the way that they are doing things from a technology company perspective, and then from the TSIA, some of the best practices and things that they're seeing. So I do hope that you will get value today, but also continue to consume this series as we go forward. So today, as I mentioned, I'm going to spend most of the time talking about utilization, and primarily around leveraging the tracking of utilization and understanding how how your services folks are spending their time, and how you can leverage that data and that tracking to really hone in on gaining greater efficiencies and looking for ways to develop greater opportunity for your services team. But as I mentioned a moment ago, I'm going to start with something that's near and dear to my heart. It's something that every time we start working with a new client, I ask if I can take a look at the professional services charter. And surprisingly enough, or maybe it's not surprising, that the answer is, well, we kind of have one, or we got one that's sort of unspoken, or it's spoken but it's not documented. So I can't stress the importance of this enough. This is something that we leverage a lot at Informatica, and that I've encouraged clients that I've worked with since then to have a formalized document. You can call it a charter, you can call it a responsibilities document, you call it whatever you want. But the key here is to have a document that is shared across the enterprise, that brings clarity into the primary responsibility, the financial model, some KPIs, the activities, rules, and dependencies for your services organization. And this is so key today, I think more now so than ever before, because so many technology companies, especially SaaS technology companies, are being forced to pivot with their professional services organizations. With the economy being the state it is, especially the state of the tech economy, so many technology companies are being squeezed for margin and revenue, and so there were oftentimes technology services teams that had a mission or a charter for just adoption, just help our customers adopt, help bring them on board. Don't worry about cost. Services is a cost center. Um, don't worry about revenue. Don't worry about margin. Just focus on getting our customers to adopt. And then almost on a dime, that gets turned to, wow, we need to at least be break even for professional services, or we need to drive some level of profitability. Oh, but by the way, don't stop what you were doing before as far as onboarding and making sure that our customers adopt. And it's really difficult to focus on both things equally. So when I talk about the primary mission of your professional services team, what is the CEO, what is the number one thing that your company needs from your professional services? If everything else was put aside, what is the number one thing that's important to them? And oftentimes you will get, well, it's all of the above. The point here is, what is the number one thing I need to focus on as a services leader? Is it revenue and margin? Are the number one thing you need for me, Mr. CFO, CEO, is I got to drive X amount of revenue, or I got to drive X percent of margin. And that's the number one thing you want from me over the next year, 6 months, whatever it is. Maybe it is still just customer adoption, onboarding, supporting our customers, making sure they adopt. And secondarily, it's revenue and margin. But the number one thing is customer adoption. Great. The third point would be partner enabler or support. We're pivoting now. We are having our partner ecosystem deliver the lion's share of our services, or we're enabling a broad ecosystem. And so our number one responsibility now as a services organization is going to be to support and enable our partner community. And I have seen all three of these, and there are probably other primary responsibilities that you could consider. But these are the three that I see most commonly. And again, what I would suggest here is that when you build your charter, you look at the number one thing that if I have to make a trade-off, which one of these three, or whatever is your primary mission, which one of these three are going to be at the top of the list, and then which of the other components are open for negotiation, which one's open for negotiation, and which ones are not open for negotiation. So that's one thing to keep in mind as far as the primary mission. The other thing that I think is really important then is to provide some level of your basic financial metrics, regardless of what your primary mission is. I think it's important as a services leader to at least keep track of some very high level metrics. What sort of revenue are we driving? Even if we're a cost center, even if we're not above the line as far as profitability, just in general, how much revenue am I bringing, or is my organization bringing to the company? What are the costs? What is my organization costing the company? Very simple, it could just be, the cost of your headcount, it could be the cost of your headcount and, machines that you use, or specific software that you need. You can go into all kinds of levels of depth there. And then with those basic revenue and costs, you can calculate your margin. Again, as a services leader, I've always been compelled, whether I was, I had a part of my portfolio that was intended to be break even or profitable or a cost center. I always felt it was important, for at least for me, to track that financial model, because you just never know when those bits of information and that data is going to be critical for someone in the organization. So Keep that in mind, and then the key performance metrics. Again, I hope these are fairly self-explanatory, but how many customers are we touching? What are the customer satisfaction scores if we're doing surveys for the work that we're doing? How many projects have we delivered? What's the time? And this could go on and on and on, just depending on what your primary mission is. But the point that I'm making here is tying back to your primary mission. What are the key performance metrics, the ones that either you're being measured on, your team's being measured on, or just overall what's going to be important for your company to understand? And then finally, the three things here at the bottom. What are the core activities that my services team is responsible for? What are the primary services that I deliver to not only my customers, but my internal stakeholders? Again, I think many of you who are responsible for services organizations have stakeholders not only in the customer community, but you have partners that you have responsibilities for. You have internal commitments where you're supporting your sales team, you're supporting your support team, your CSMs. So it's really important to document the core activities, especially as it relates to overlapping content with internal and internal stakeholders and partners. I think it's important to identify some key risks. Again, this shouldn't be a 30-page document that outlines every single risk that you're facing, but it should have the ones that you believe are going to be the most prevalent in challenging you to deliver your primary mission, challenging you to deliver on your financial metrics or your KPIs. And then the other item here is key dependencies. What is it going to make for you to be successful? What are the things that you have to get from? And again, here, I tend to see a lot of focus being put on internal dependencies, what you're counting on from your sales organization. Is your sales organization responsible for helping to sell services? What support are you looking to get from the product team? Are you counting on certain capabilities from the product team to be able to deliver your services engagements? So again, shouldn't be a 30-page document. Identify what are some dependencies that I have from the various organizations. Partner community is included in this as well. What are the key dependencies that I have that are the most critical, that are really going to impede or enhance my capability or my ability to deliver against this charter? So the other thing that I'll add is once you have this established, share it, make it visible, put it, if you've got an internal wiki, if you've got some sort of Confluence site, whatever you've got internally that your internal stakeholders frequent, you're going to want to share it. You're going to want to make this visible. You're going to want to make sure that it's, some of this is included in your company all hands calls, at some level of frequencies. And then you're going to want to update this annually at least, but I would also say at moments of pivot. And what I mean by that is, you may set out with your annual plan, and then after the first quarter, things don't go so well from a company perspective, and so there's a lot of change to sort of the direction of the company, and so that represents a pivot. There might be some things that your team's going to have to do then to challenges, and so you'll want to update the charter to make sure that you are demonstrating and taking into account the changes that you're being asked to make as part of that pivot. Now, I'll also put in a plug here. This charter discussion is one that had a lot of questions from the previous call, so that's why I spent a little bit more time on this here. I'm also going to be writing a blog. I've included the link here for our nCloud Integrators LinkedIn account. And so stay tuned over the next couple of weeks. I'll be putting a little more detail into this via a blog that we'll be posting that talks about this and breaks each of these pieces down in a little more detail. So stay tuned for that. But jumping into utilization fundamentals. So the first thing I'll say is when I talk to customers about utilization rate. And this is one of the things in the services industry. The utilization rate is one of the most common metrics I hear thrown around, in conversations that I have with customers or industry events that I'm at. And so I think it's really important when you're talking about utilization that you're always comparing apples to apples. And again, I know that this is probably captain obvious stuff, but the utilization calculation is just a very simple formula. At the very top, you've got the total number of billed hours. And when I say billed hours, I'm talking about hours that your company is receiving revenue for a consultant's time. So billable hours, total billed hours, divided by the total hours that are available in a year. So, or whatever the time frame is. So it's really important to understand what's going into this formula. I can't tell you the number of times at either at Informatica or working with clients where they would say, "Gosh, my CFO talked to a CFO from XYZ company, and he said they're running at 95% utilization for their professional services team." The first thing I ask is, what's the numerator? What's the denominator? How are they calculating that utilization? And so I'll share here a fairly common formula. So 2080 in the United States anyway is technically the total number of work hours available in any given calendar year, 2080. And that's the total amount. That's not taking out vacation, that's not taking out holidays, that's not taking out anything. That is just the total available hours in a standard given year, as far as the number of weeks and the number of hours in a week and that sort of thing. And this is also the number that the TSIA recommends, the Technology Services Industry Association. And I mentioned the TSIA a little earlier in the thread here, but for those of you that aren't familiar, the TSIA, Technology Services Industry Association, is an industry association for technology companies. If you're not familiar with it, please Google TSIA and you can get to their website. I've partnered with the TSIA for over 20 years now in a number of capacities, and so I work with them, and I also leverage their data and leverage their content. So the TSIA does recommend that for universal calculations of the utilization number, you always use 2080 as the denominator. And that takes out all of the ambiguity. So again, some companies will say, well, our utilization rate, we don't use 2080, we use 2040 because we take out 40 hours for holidays, or we take out 80 hours. We use 2000s. We take out 80 hours for holiday, or we use 1680 because we take out holidays and time off. But it's really important if you're going to get your practice and your utilization compared to some other organization or some other practice, you want to make sure that you are asking about how that's being calculated. What's the numerator? What's the denominator? Now, this specific number that I've shared here, 63%, that is the current average in the technology industry for professional services organizations. So using the 2080 formula, the average number of billable hours, is 1310. And this is a metric that was shared from the TSIA at one of the recent conferences that I attended. And so it's 63% as an industry average. Now, there are so many things that go into this, and so it's important to understand that I have seen clients that have 50% utilization and less, and I have seen clients that have 95% utilization or more. But there are a lot of extenuating circumstances that will drive that number up or down one way or the other. So What's really important is over time and based on your charter and based on the focus that you have for your practice, you'll be able to then, as time goes on, identify the positive or negative impact of the work that you're doing internally and externally, and how that affects your overall utilization rate. So spend time on this because I think it's important for service leaders to always understand that you're comparing apples to apples when you get compared to other companies. But also, I think it's important to make this formula visible to your internal stakeholders. Make it visible so that your internal stakeholders, your peer group, the head of support, the head of education, the head of the customer success team, they understand how you evaluate and how you track utilization, so that when you share this number internally, if you share it internally, that you've got an educated audience. And you may want to, put something like this together to help educate them on how these things are calculated and what it means. All right, so now that we've just sort of set the stage here for tracking billable utilization, again, I will say, or not again, I guess what I'll state here is the obvious. As a consulting leader and in a consulting practice, time is money. When you look at billable utilization for every hour that I'm getting paid, or that I'm being paid for one of my consultants' time, that is revenue for my professional services organization. And so time is undoubtedly money. And so what is really important then, from a basic perspective, is you want to make sure that as a services leader, you are tracking to whatever level of depth you can how your consultants are spending their time. And again, I do understand there are probably folks listening to this or that are on this call that are well beyond some of these basics, but then there are probably some folks that are just getting started or haven't been tracking basics or haven't been tracking hours at all. So I'm going to start with the basics and just share some thoughts on what are some minimal tracking elements. So first of all, first and foremost, when you think about what should I, when I ask my consultants to document their time in a given week or a given month, what are the minimal things that we should be tracking? Well, of course, at the highest level, the first thing that I would look at is billable project time. For every project that I have a consultant working on, how many hours did they spend on that project? And it's important to distinguish between billable and non-billable. So I'll get to that here in just a moment. But billable project time should be any hour that a consultant, that you are receiving revenue for that consultant. That's billable project time. There may be non-billable time that you are spending on those projects, but there also are going to be non-billable efforts that your consultants are participating in internally. Perhaps they are being shared by the customer success organization. And so they're spending 5 hours a week, 10 hours a week, 15 hours a week, helping deliver customer success activities. They may be getting involved in customer support activities. So at a minimum, what I would recommend is that for every significant non-billable effort that your consultants are spending time on, you'll want to have a way to track that effort. And depending on the level of granularity you want to go to, you may put the specific non-billable time that they're spending with customer success, the specific time they're spending with the sales team, the specific time they're spending with support. And then you may even go more granular than that and put on specific projects that they're working on within those various external activities or internal activities. And then the other thing that's important here is we all know what's going to happen. You are working on a project and something goes bump in the night and you're having to do work for free. There's hours that your consultants are being that they're delivering that is non-billable on that project. So it's important from my perspective and my experience to be able to track that as well at a minimum. Administrative time. How much time? This is one of those things that I find extremely interesting because I ask new customers when I'm doing an evaluation of their services practice. I'll typically do interviews with their team. I'll take a look at sort of whatever level of tracking they have on administrative work. And more often than not, the teams are actually quite surprised at exactly how much time their consultants are spending doing administrative work. Things like things like attending internal meetings, things like developing content for other organizations, just general administrative tasks, completing tasks around developing best practices, things like that. So there are a lot of things, completing a timesheet. There are a lot of things that take consultants' time from an administrative perspective, and it's really important to have an ability to track how much time am I spending, or is my practice spending on administrative activities. Education and training. The other thing that we should all be doing as services leaders is looking at what sort of career and skill enhancements we're providing to our services team. So it's really important to have a tracking of any time that's spent developing technical or soft skills. And I think it's critically important that as services leaders, we spend time on both of those, helping our consultants improve their technical skills, but also helping them to improve their soft skills as well. So any type of training that you require. There's also a lot of corporate governance type training that many organizations have to go through. There's security training, there's DEI training, there is data privacy. I mean, so not only are there services specific training, but then there's a lot of corporate training that individuals are asked to complete every year as well. All of that should be tracked as part of your time tracking. And then finally, anytime that a consultant is unavailable to your practice because they are spending time away, time off, whether it's vacation on an island somewhere with palm trees, or they are spending time away helping family members, or whatever the case might be. So these are kind of the 5 basic elements that, from a services leader perspective, when I'm asked, I want to get started. I don't want to overwhelm my consultants with having to measure every single hour of their day. What are some core things that we should just put into place? What are some core areas, categories that we should track? So start with these, and then from there, as you get more and more advanced, we can get into some of the intermediate considerations. In fact, that's the next thing that we'll get into here. Then is what level of depth, then what level of granularity do we track our client or our consultant utilization beyond those basic components? And I'm just going to focus on project level for this thread, given the limited amount of time that I have here today. I'm going to focus on the project level. And the reason I'm going to focus on project level is because this is a way for you, from my perspective, this is a way for you to dramatically increase the effectiveness, the efficiency, and the capability of your services practice across all of the offerings that you have. So what I'll state first here is, for every offering that you have from a professional services perspective, I would highly recommend that you have a model for that or a methodology for that, depending on your level of sophistication with your practice, depending on the age of your practice or the age of the offerings that you have. I would expect that you would at least start with a delivery of model of some sort, and then evolve to having a full-blown methodology that provides sort of a step-by-step sort of cookie cutter process for delivering those projects. So at the project level, I would recommend that you have a project level code for every offering that you have. That's just sort of that ties back to the previous slide where I said for billable work. But then I would recommend that within that project level detail, I would recommend that you incorporate phase level. So this is, you've gotten started, you've developed a core set of utilization metrics that you're tracking for your consultants. The next thing to look at is what are the phases that we're going to track. And I'll talk about these in detail here in just a moment, but when you're moving to levels of sophistication with utilization and understanding how your consultants are spending their time, it starts at the project level, moves to the phase level, then down to the task level, the deliverable level, and then finally, you want to put this at appropriate increments. And what I mean by that is for your phase, your task, and your deliverable levels, depending on the amount of experience that you have with your project delivery or this offering that you're delivering, you're going to want to track these at the appropriate level of increments. And let me share some details for that. So starting with the phase level tracking, again, I mentioned at the beginning, we use Rocket Lane internally, but I have used Certinia, formerly Financial Force. I've used the NetSuite tools as well. And then I've also used Smartsheets for this. So I don't want you to get hung up as much on the platform, but rather, and all of those platforms, by the way, have a capability of tracking at least at the phase and the task and the deliverable level. So whichever platform you're using or you're familiar with, this level of tracking should be available for you within that PSA. But at the phase level tracking, what I'll highlight here is, and this is for a core on building. So onboarding template. We have an offering that's basically an onboarding for a technology tool, and it's broken down into these 6 phases. There's a pre-kickoff, there's a kickoff, there's an initialize, there's a build, there's an activate, and there's a run. And what I'll say about the phases is my recommendation with your phases, you see here that I've used 6, you may have 7, 8, you may have up to 10. I would not recommend going further than 10 phases for each sort of project type that you're delivering, or each offering that you're delivering. If you have more than that, there's probably an opportunity to consolidate. If you have if you have something that goes well outside of that, I'd be very interested in a follow-up conversation to see what's driving that requirement. But I would recommend that you match the major events or milestone moments within your project. And it may match the 6 that I have here. It may be completely different, but just think about at the project level, at the delivery level, what are those major transition points and milestones that we're going to track? And then as far as the duration and the timing, when I get asked, well, what do you put in here as far as the granularity, the level of detail on the start and the timing of this? I think what's really important is that you estimate from the best of your ability, based on your project plan for this particular project or this particular offering, the calendar date that should coincide with that, with that particular phase. And the reason that I just highlight that is what you will want to do with your methodology as you go forward. You're going to want to identify when you have variances or how much of a variance you have in your methodology for when those dates occur. And again, at the beginning of this, it may vary wildly, but over time, as you leverage your utilization metrics, as you leverage this data that you're capturing, you'll be able to zero in on how to improve those dates, how to improve your project planning, and how to improve your overall project efficiency by tracking that at a more granular level. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention here is that phases don't have to be linear. And this is another thing that I think is really important to understand. Many projects, depending on the methodology that you're using, but a lot of times you're going to have a phase where you've got tasks and deliverables that you haven't completed yet, but yet you've started the next phase of the project. So you want to keep those things in mind when you are estimating the calendar, start date for each one. It doesn't necessarily mean that the previous phase has to be completed. And it's also important to understand that these don't necessarily have to be linear. Now, again, some may argue or raise their hand and say, well, wait a minute, we use a waterfall or we use a methodology where it does have to be linear, and that's great. You can get far more granular with this, and you can get far more specific on when you expect the start date and the durations. But I, for a lot of projects, a lot of offerings, I see this as a nonlinear activity. And so you're just putting your best guess based on the data that you do have available or the data that you build over time. And then finally, the duration. Again, some of you may be looking at this and saying, man, we have no idea. We're just getting started. It's a brand new offering. We have no idea. It's important just to start with your best estimate. And as you go through this, the reason that tracking time and tracking this data is so important is that it will help you narrow these gaps and zero in on where you have deviations, where you have challenges as you go along. So it's really important to just start, even if it's just kind of putting a finger in the air and saying, yeah, this project or this phase should take 15 days. You can see from this example, we have some very specific numbers in there. 3 days, 22 days, 16 days. These numbers are very specific because we have gone through a number of iterations of this methodology and leveraging the data, and this has helped us really narrow down how much time each phase should take. And then for me, from a reporting perspective, I can then look at where we have anomalies, what's creating points of friction, and what challenges we're encountering from my consulting team so that I can help them overcome those issues. I can put early warnings into my PSA and do all kinds of things in an automated fashion that help reduce friction and help improve the overall delivery of my services projects. So some things just to think about from a phase level tracking. Now, clicking in a level deeper from that, the next question is, okay, so now we're tracking a project, and within the project, we're tracking at least the number of hours that a consultant is putting into a phase. The next level of granularity then is the actual task level. Again, I've got a lot of stuff in our template. We have evolved to the point where we have this fairly set as a cookie cutter thing. You can just follow the steps one by one. So we've got a lot of tasks. You may be just getting started, or as you get new delivery projects or you get new offerings, just put the fundamental things here, the core tasks that are going to take the significant amount of time for your team to deliver. That's what you should be considering as far as the task level tracking. And that's at the basic side. Now, for those of you that are more advanced, again, you may be looking at this and saying, Brian, this is Captain Obvious stuff. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know what level of task, visibility I should have. So I'll just share, some things that I've learned kind of across the spectrum here. First of all, visibility considerations. One thing that I often ask, even some of the most advanced and sophisticated services organizations that I work with, what level of visibility do you provide to your customers for the tasks that you have in your project plan? This is really important in today's age because more often than not, when I talk to a consulting team and I ask, what is the number one thing that slows down your projects? Almost, I would say over 90% of the time, they will say the customer not getting back to us with the things that they're responsible for in the project plan. And it's not that this is a new thing, but it's just now more than ever. I think so many companies are operating with fewer resources. There's a lot of resource sharing. A lot of people are wearing multiple hats. And so it's really important in order to hold your clients accountable for the deliverables that your team is counting on to move the project forward. It's really important to provide visibility. So again, just as you look at this screenshot, the yellow items are things that are visible from our technology platform, the one that we use. We have a distinction between what my consultants see when they're looking at this project plan and this methodology, and then the yellow items are what our customers are able to see. We build a whole lot of automations around what our customers are responsible for because we want to constantly remind them. We want to constantly send emails out. We want to constantly check up on the status of these things so that we don't have stalls in our projects because the client hasn't completed a task or a deliverable that they were responsible for. So again, that's just a quick note on the visibility of the level of tasks that you're putting into your project plan details. As far as the task level, the level of tasks that you want to put into, again, as I said a moment ago, you want to start with what you have today. So you may only have 5 key tasks that you know need to be completed at the highest level for each phase. If that's what you've got, start with that. Just put those in and put in how many days you think that should take, and just start. You may only have 2 tasks that you know at this point, but put the level of detail that you have in there today. And then as you go forward, you'll add more detail, more levels of granularity. And also the other thing that's really important here is for those of you that aren't tracking this, inevitably there's some change management that's going to need to be considered with your consultants, right? They may not be submitting timesheets today, or they may only be submitting very minimal timesheet levels of detail. So the other thing that I'll say about this is you're going to want to and need to work with your team, show them the importance of this, show the value that this is going to create for them as you go forward, and then start with a minimal level of granularity and detail so that they can get used to the cadence, they can get used to the level of detail that they have to put into these things, and then add to that level of detail as you go forward. So that's the other thing I want to mention here is start with the basics, start with what your team can stomach without having a mutiny on your hands. And then as the adoption grows, then you can get more and more granular and you'll get more and more sophisticated. And then as far as the duration and timing, again, I'll just state that the key consideration here, the critical thing for this is to look at what is a targeted timeline to start and finish that task in relation to the overall project calendar or the overall project timeline. The key here is, again, to give you as a leader a focus on where these critical tasks are either behind schedule or ahead of schedule. And then the effort, it again will give you some basic idea of, I've got a consultant that spends way too much time on it, and I've got a consultant that spends not enough time on it, and I've got a consultant that gets it just right. So it's really important just to start with some averages, and then again, as time goes on, you'll increase the granularity. Now, I know I'm getting short on time. I'm moving a little bit quickly here. I've covered a fair amount of content, but I do want to talk about some advanced capabilities around this. So when you think about, all right, this is figuring out how I'm going to create greater profitability, leveraging utilization. And so it starts with kind of, as I've covered so far, making sure that you've got visibility into how your consultants are spending their time, how your projects are going, how much time you're spending on each project, because this is going to help you refine and get more efficient with your project delivery. And it's also going to help you identify where you are expending too much effort, you're getting outside of that profitability, you're spending too many hours, it's eroding your margin from a project margin perspective. So it's really important before you can, before you can really tighten the screws and move the dials effectively with your services projects and creating more profitable projects. You've got to have these fundamental things in and being able to track this data through your utilization tracking. Now, once you have that information, the advent of AI is helping make this process infinitely easier from from a reporting and analytics perspective. And so I've just shared a slide here. I mentioned that I was at at a recent TSIA event. I co-delivered a presentation on leveraging AI for services convergence. This was basically the topic is if you're sharing resources across your services teams, professional services, customer success, support, how can you leverage AI to manage that process? But I think what's important here is for the purposes of this conversation is now that you are tracking this information at a basic level or even at a detailed level for the way your consultants are spending their time, you can now tie some of the key metrics around project delays, budget overruns, resource transitions, vendor versus partner, level of enablement. So when you get sophisticated with your tracking of utilization of internal and external resources, you'll be able to take these kinds of metrics and you can actually compare them. For those of you that are tracking product usage data, you can actually do an AI analysis between your product usage and your internal services delivery, and it can give you some very quick and very incredible insight into the effect your professional services organization is for the overall enterprise, how we are affecting customer adoption, how we are affecting customer performance, how we are affecting our company profitability. As a services leader, I know how important it is to be able to go to the CFO, to be able to go to the head of sales, to be able to go to the CEO and say, look, I've done an analysis. I've taken the data that I have from my professional services organization. I've taken some data from some product usage data. I've leveraged AI, and I've been able to show some very specific details about the impact our practice is having on the success for our company. And so I put that at a very high level, but you can also do this at the project level, at the offering level. And so this will help you create a better visualization for how profitable you are across the different offerings that you have. And I'll just share a quick example before I wrap up. This is an example of an analysis that we did on a premium versus a standard offering. So there was an onboarding offering, and we have a premium version of it, and then we have a standard version of it. The red is the premium, the light blue is the standard. And this basically shows the average duration by phase for those projects. And obviously you'll notice on the far left, the amount of time that we spend on the kickoff phase for the premium service was a heck of a lot longer than what we spend on the one for the standard. But the really interesting thing was that, and this was something that we hadn't anticipated, that wasn't expected at all, but when we did an analysis using the same analytics that I've shared with you already, the same basic, simple utilization tracking across the project level, we were able to then leverage AI to give us some insight that showed the average duration of every other phase was actually shorter with our premium package than it was with our standard package. And in fact, it showed that the total duration in calendar days was actually only 4 or 5 more days, when in fact we had a premium price attached to that premium package. So Again, when you talk about services profitability and how to improve your services profitability through monitoring your utilization and monitoring your consultant delivery, this is a very simple but real world example of how you can take that data and get nuggets of knowledge around what your practice is doing well, where you can take some of this work that you're doing and apply it for a more profitable services opportunity. So I know I've covered a lot. I don't know how much time we actually have. I know it's the top of the hour, so many of you may have to drop. If you have questions, I'll take them now. If you have a question that you wanted to ask but you couldn't and you've got to jump, I'll take those questions and I'll answer them as we go. Any questions that I can answer? All right. Well, team, I know a lot of you have to jump, so I'll just close out by saying thank you all. I think you probably got my contact information, but I'll put it here as well. Feel free to reach out if you've got any questions. I'd be happy to work with you and answer your questions. I love this stuff. Hopefully, the excitement and the energy that I have for this work shines through in the presentation, and would love to help out in any way I can. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.